Former South African President Jacob Zuma's lawyers argued on Monday that Zuma has been treated unfairly in their application for a permanent stay of prosecution from corruption charges relating to a $2.2 billion arms deal. Mr. Zuma's fight for a permanent stay of prosecution against him continues today. He took a swipe at the National Prosecuting Authority prosecutors, saying they were ambitious to charge him. Details in this report.
Zuma, who made his fifth court appearance since the charges were reinstated, facing 16 charges of fraud, racketeering and money laundering relating to a deal to buy 30 billion rand of European military hardware for South Africa's armed forces in the late 1990s. The 77-year-old Zuma, whose 9 years in power were marked by economic stagnation and credit rating downgrades, has previously said he is the victim of a politically motivated witch hunt.
And my learned friends on the other side who want to lynch Mr. Zuma to a prison cell are probably the only one in this room who's asked him this question, because I did. Mr. Zuma, are you corrupt? It's the first question I asked him when I met him.
The charges against Zuma were originally filed a decade ago, but then set aside by the National Prosecuting Authority shortly before he successfully ran for president in 2009. After his election, his opponent fought a lengthy legal battle to have the changes reinstated, finally succeeding in 2016. Zuma countered with his own legal challenges.
We think the National Prosecuting Authority subscribes to in the manner in which they have dealt with Mr. Zuma. I called it the mob justice. It's driven and inspired by something all of us in this room have, to varying degrees. It's bias.
The case is a rare example of an African leader being held to account for his actions. Zuma has, however, denied any wrongdoing. Ibrahim Shita, TVC News.
All right, I have joining me live on the news a lawyer, Olayinka Ola-Daniels, in the studio, as well as the chairman of the Board of Trustees of Institute of Security Studies and head African Future and Innovation, Jackie Cilliers, on Skype in Cape Town. Good to have you. Let me begin with you first of, well, Jacob Zuma says that this is a witch hunt. Is it? Unfortunately, we can't hear him. We'll try to correct that as quickly as possible. Let me ask you the same question. This issue of witch hunt, that seems to be what you hear when the law seems to want to have its way with politically exposed persons, whether in South Africa or wherever else.
Well, you know, we are good with that phrase in Africa. Anything that happens, it goes to witch hunting, and even when you are culpable, it's still witch hunting. Even when there are investigations and there are proofs that something close like that has happened, it's still witch hunting. But now this is Mr. Zuma that belongs to a particular political party, and ANC, and it's still the same political party running the show of the country. Now, if this party used to belong to the party, because you're still a member of the party, now saying that it's still a witch hunt, I beg to differ, because he tried severally at different times to influence the prosecution, to influence the judiciary, even while he was the president.
And he's still asking for a stay of prosecution.
He's been doing that, but thank God, because they had institution that could work, not an individual. So the institution, even with all his influence on the judiciary, on the prosecution, you can still see that they did not relent. They are still doing their work, and they are still working and coming to tell us that this is witch hunt. I beg to disagree.
Well, his argument, including that of his counsel, is that he's being treated unfairly in their application for a permanent stay of prosecution. That's what he...
Yes.
Yeah.
You can't be asking for a permanent stay of prosecution.
Well, is it being treated unfairly?
I don't see that. I'm not saying that because nothing is unfair from what has been happening so far as in this trial. Nothing is unfair because you came in to ask for stay of prosecution on a criminal charges. No, you don't. If you are free, then go ahead. If you are free, if the court find you not guilty, then you are discharged and acquitted.
Do you think with narrowing in on the $2.2 billion arms deal is a smoking gun that the prosecution has? Because there's so many other charges that, you know, of course, the housing issue and so many other...
Don't forget that the rape issue came, it was dropped. The arson issue came.
Yes.
Somehow the prosecutor still dropped it. And here we are. If, at least, if you are clean, if you are not guilty, if investigation has not proven otherwise, then there's no need you coming to court. But if all these things are so glaring, that means you have a case to answer.
All right, let me bring in Jackie Silias here, who is in South Africa. You have a bird's eye view of what's going on there. Give us a feel of your thoughts. Zuma is asking for a stay of prosecution. He said this is nothing but a witch hunt.
President Jacob Zuma has been fighting this for more than 10 years, and he has adopted what is in South Africa known as the Stalingrad option of defense. So he has defended himself against these accusations, fighting from trench to trench and using huge state resources to defend himself in the process. And I think there are a few things that the majority of South Africans would like to see more, and that is that President Zuma should go to trial. And that if we look at the extent of corruption that happened under his regime, I think many of us feel that he belongs in jail, and that these efforts to find excuses not to prosecute him just do not stand up, certainly not in the public eye.
Yeah, that seems to be the general sentiment with South Africans, that he belongs in prison. But let's look at the legal process. Does the prosecution have a good case against Jacob Zuma with the way it seems right now?
Zuma received influence and access through in the process of this arms deal. It's not a huge amount of money. It's about 2.5 million rand, or I think it's $240,000 or something. Payments that he received to use his influence to shield Tails, the arms company. And of course, he has been fighting this for 10 years. So now his argument is that in the public court, he cannot be judged independently. And I think that that argument, certainly in the public eye, does not go, because he has been the main reason why he hasn't been able to be brought to trial. To now argue that this has taken so long that I no longer can have a free and fair trial, I think just doesn't hold. Certainly not in the eyes of ordinary South Africans. Of course, there's always the legal challenges and issues in interpretation of the law. But thus far, if you look at what's been happening in court, it doesn't seem like the judges have much patience for President Zuma's lawyers.
And how is that going to pan out for his chances? What will Jacob Zuma going to jail mean for South Africa and South Africans going forward?
I think it would be a huge relief for South Africa. It would reflect for the first time that the main architect and facilitator of massive state capture and corruption in South Africa is held to account. It would be a victory within the ANC. There have been a series of court cases and commissions of inquiry that have laid bare how President Zuma facilitated corruption in South Africa on a massive scale, either deliberately or by looking the other way or by helping his friends, particularly the so-called Gupta family of Indian origin who came to South Africa. And the South Africans feel this issue is never coming to a close. When is somebody going to be held to account? And the head of that corruption, the process that facilitated that, is unfortunately former President Jacob Zuma. But I think that practically what will happen is that he'll go to trial, he'll be found guilty, but I guess that at the end of the day we may see a presidential pardon. But that in South African law can only occur after Zuma has been found guilty in the court of law.
All right, thank you very much, Jackie Silias from South Africa there. Back to you right here in the studio. This matter has gone on for over a decade. Yes. What does that in itself say?
Well, don't forget that democracy in Africa is a growing one. And if we have, and this also cut across to every other African nations, most of our leaders have been found culpable of this same act. You know, look at Uganda, even Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, and, you know, there are some other African nations that are doing the same, because if not, seriously, Zuma should not be the president of South Africa as at the time he was, even before the fall of Zuma. And some of these African leaders also that are still sitting there are not supposed to be there, because these are the things they do. Look at it, 10 years, meaning that even before he became the president of ANC, before he then became the president of South Africa, he's been influencing this. He's been trying to shut down every opportunity he has. I mean, for a president going to national TV, as in during the trial, during the rape trial, to be saying that, well, I had my birth after the rape. I mean, and nothing was done about it. Nobody see anything as serious as that. So that's to tell you, once we have that power, that is all. And we have forgotten something in Africa, that power is ephemeral.
It's temporal.
Transient.
Thank you very
temporal.
much. We'll have to leave it there. Very instructive. Olayinka Ola-Daniels.
Thank you
For joining us.